We will just try to understand in few minutes what is null hypothesis, that is written as usually H naught. Whenever we have to compare the two groups in analytical studies, which are the case control and cohort studies, or our true experimental studies, which are the randomized controlled trials or clinical trials, we start them with some hypothesis. And usually we start them with the null hypothesis, which simply means there is no difference. There is no difference between the groups or between the variables. We start by thinking that there is no difference between the groups. There is no difference between the two variables, and this is the null hypothesis. Now, obviously, either we will reject this after our research, or we will not reject it. Now, there is slight controversy in these things. In some literature, you will see that you accept the null hypothesis or you reject the hypothesis. While some people are of the notion that you reject the null hypothesis or you will not reject it. Some of the people are of the view that you should not use the word accept. So we will go by both the things. So null hypothesis means there is no difference between the groups or variables, and either we will have to now reject the null hypothesis or we will not reject the null hypothesis. So now what is the scenario? Here we have this null hypothesis. Now obviously this null hypothesis, there is no difference between the groups. Either it will be true or it will be false. Now we are going to clear the very important two phenomena. What is the type 1 error and what is the type 2 error? Now the null hypothesis with which we are starting our research, where we are comparing the two groups, we are starting them with there is no difference between the groups. So this null hypothesis, obviously it may be true, it may be false. Now the null hypothesis is true, and it is also not rejected. It was true and it was also not rejected, means the null hypothesis was accepted. So there is no error obviously. But if the null hypothesis was true but it was rejected, this is called type 1 error. So very simply, what's the meaning of type 1 error when we are talking about the null hypothesis? That the null hypothesis was true but it was rejected. Null hypothesis was true but it was rejected. This means it is type 1 error, and the probability of the type 1 error is alpha. Now there is the other scenario that the null hypothesis was false. Null hypothesis was saying that there is no difference between the two variables, but actually it was false and there was difference between the two variables. Now again there will be two scenarios. This false null hypothesis, either it will be rejected or it will not be rejected. So what should have happened? This is a false null hypothesis, so it should have been rejected. If it is rejected, then that means no error. But if the null hypothesis was false but it was not rejected, so this is called type 2 error, and the probability of type 2 error is beta. So this is the most simplified way to find out what is the null hypothesis and what's the meaning of type 1 error and type 2 error while we are talking about the null hypothesis.